The air in the concrete parking garage was thick with the smell of old exhaust and something metallic, like copper, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up straight. It was exactly 3:14 a.m. when I stepped out of the hospital side entrance, my body aching from a double shift, but the silence of the garage was so absolute that it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I remember the rhythmic clicking of my own boots echoing off the low ceiling, a sound that felt far too loud in a place that should have been empty, until I realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that there was a second set of footsteps perfectly synced with my own. Every time I slowed down, the phantom echo slowed down, and every time I sped up, the invisible presence behind the concrete pillars mirrored my pace with a terrifying, predatory precision. I stopped abruptly near a massive support beam labeled for G, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and the silence that followed was even more deafening than the noise. I peered around the corner, my eyes straining against the flickering yellow light of a dying fluorescent bulb, and that is when I saw him. He wasn't a ghost or a figment of my exhausted imagination. He was a man dressed in a dark, heavy utility jacket, kneeling beside a silver sedan with a set of professional tools spread out on a velvet cloth. He didn't look like a common thief or a desperate addict. He looked like a technician of crime, someone who moved with a calm, cold efficiency that made my blood turn to ice. When he looked up and our eyes locked in the reflection of the car's window, he didn't run or look surprised. Instead, he stood up slowly, his movements fluid and intentional, and he began to walk toward me with a look of bored determination, as if I were simply a minor complication he needed to remove. Why was he not wearing a mask in a garage filled with security cameras? And why did he look so certain that those cameras wouldn't matter by the time the sun came up? I turned and bolted, my lungs burning as I sprinted toward the glass elevator bank, the only exit that didn't involve a long, exposed walk up the vehicle ramps. I could hear the heavy thud of his boots behind me, a relentless thump 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 that seemed to be gaining ground no matter how fast I pushed my trembling legs. I reached the elevator and smashed my thumb against the call button, watching the floor indicator crawl down from the 8th level with agonizing slowness while the shadow of the man grew longer and wider against the far wall. The doors finally slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a funeral bell, and I dove inside, frantically hitting the button for the roof level where the pedestrian bridge connected to the main street. As the doors began to close, a gloved hand suddenly jammed itself into the gap, triggering the safety sensor and forcing the heavy metal panels to slide back open with a mechanical groan. I backed into the corner of the elevator, brandishing my heavy medical bag like a useless shield, as the man stepped halfway into the car and stared at me with eyes that were completely devoid of emotion. He didn't say a word. He just reached for the control panel, his fingers hovering over the emergency stop button as if he wanted to savor the moment of my total realization. In a moment of pure, unadulterated panic, I lunged forward and swung my bag with every ounce of strength I had left, catching him off guard and knocking him back onto the concrete floor of the garage. I slammed the close door button repeatedly, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps, and this time the doors hissed shut and the car began to rise. I thought I was safe for a fleeting second, but then the elevator gave a violent shudder and the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, leaving me in a vertical coffin of glass and steel. The car had stalled between the 3rd and 4th floors, suspended in the dark, and through the glass back of the elevator, I could see the man standing on the level below, looking up at me with a terrifyingly calm expression. He walked over to a maintenance hatch on the wall, a small metal door that I knew contained the manual override for the entire elevator system. My mind raced through every horror movie scenario I had ever seen, wondering if he was going to drop the car or simply bring it back down to his level to finish what he had started. How could a place as mundane as a hospital parking garage become a high-stakes arena where my life hung by a literal cable? I watched him pull a heavy lever inside the maintenance hatch, and I felt the elevator car lurch downward, a sickening drop that made my stomach turn over. I was being lowered back to him, floor by floor, and there was absolutely nowhere for me to hide in the transparent box. I began to frantically search the ceiling of the elevator, looking for an escape hatch, but it was bolted shut from the outside for security. As the floor indicator ticked back down toward 3, I realized I had only seconds to act before the doors would open and I would be face to face with a man who had already decided I wasn't going home. I looked at my medical bag and remembered the heavy oxygen cylinder I had been transporting for a home care patient. I pulled it out, my hands slick with sweat, and positioned myself right next to the door frame, hidden in the narrow sliver of shadow where the light didn't reach. The elevator hit the 3rd floor with a soft thud, and the doors began to slide open, revealing the man standing there with a zip tie restraint already looped in his hands. He stepped into the car, his confidence his greatest weakness, and before he could turn his head to find me, I swung the heavy steel cylinder like a battering ram into the side of his knee. I heard the sickening crack of bone, a sound that echoed through the small space, and he collapsed to the floor with a roar of genuine pain. I didn't wait to see if he could get back up. I leaped over his prone body and sprinted out of the elevator, heading not for the car ramps this time, but for the heavy fire door that led to the internal stairwell. I burst through the door and through the deadbolt from the inside, a feature meant to keep people out of the hospital, but in this moment, it was the only thing keeping me alive. I ran down the stairs, my legs feeling like lead, until I reached the ground floor lobby where the overnight security guard was sitting behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. I pounded on the window, my voice finally breaking into a scream for help, and the confusion on the guard's face quickly turned to urgency as he saw the state I was in. He hit the silent alarm and grabbed his radio, calling for backup while he ushered me into the secure office area. As I sat on the floor, shaking so hard that I could barely hold the cup of water he gave me, I looked at the security monitors and saw the man limping toward the exit of the garage, his face finally visible to the high-definition cameras. He looked up at one of the lenses and tipped his head, a final, chilling gesture of acknowledgement, before disappearing into the darkness of the city streets. I was safe, but I knew that every time I walked to my car at night, I would be looking for that shadow among the pillars, wondering if the man with the tools was waiting for a second chance. The hum of my 18-wheeler's engine was the only thing keeping me company as I drove down the pitch-black ribbon of Highway 42. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the world outside my windshield had dissolved into a void of towering pines and jagged rock faces that swallowed the reach of my high beams. I have been a long-haul trucker for 12 years, and I am used to the isolation, but tonight, the road felt different, like it was closing in on me with every mile I pushed toward the state line. My headlights caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a dark, matte black SUV sitting on the narrow shoulder with its lights completely extinguished. As I roared past it, the massive displacement of air from my trailer rocked the smaller vehicle, but I didn't think twice about it until I checked my side view mirror a mile later and saw 2 pinpricks of light snap on in the darkness behind me. Those lights didn't just stay behind me. They began to close the gap with a speed that felt aggressive and unnatural for a winding mountain pass. I shifted gears, trying to maintain a steady pace, but the black SUV pulled up so close to my rear bumper that I could no longer see its hood, only the blinding glare of its high beams reflecting off my side mirrors and searing into my retinas. Why would anyone play chicken with an 80,000-pound loaded trailer on a road known for its steep drops and unpredictable deer crossings? I tapped my brakes lightly, a universal signal for back off, but the driver behind me responded by swerving left and right, peeking out from behind my trailer as if looking for a gap to strike. It wasn't a teenager looking for a thrill. It was a hunter looking for a way to force me off the pavement and into the ravine below. The tension in my shoulders was a tight knot as I realized that the nearest truck stop was still 40 miles away, and my cell phone signal had dropped to a single, flickering bar in this deep valley. I tried to radio for help, clicking the mic and asking if anyone was on the channel, but all I got back was a wall of static that sounded like dry leaves skittering across a grave. Then, the static broke for a fraction of a second, and a voice, low, gravelly, and terrifyingly calm, whispered just one word, "Pull over." My heart skipped a beat as I realized the driver behind me was broadcasting on the same short-range frequency, watching me through my own mirrors while he toyed with my nerves. How did he know my frequency? And how long had he been waiting in the dark for a lone driver to pass his hiding spot? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the predatory shadow glued to my bumper. The SUV suddenly pulled into the left lane, drawing level with my cab, but the windows were tinted so darkly that I couldn't see the face of the person stalking me. The vehicle began to drift toward me, inching closer and closer until the metal of its side mirror brushed against my heavy door with a screeching sound that set my teeth on edge. He was trying to pit maneuver a semi-truck, a move that was suicidal for him but potentially fatal for me if I lost control and jackknifed the rig. I slammed my hand onto the air horn, a deafening blast that echoed through the canyon, but the SUV didn't flinch. It stayed right there, a silent, black ghost haunting the edge of my vision. The road began to steepen as we approached the Devil's Elbow, a series of sharp, treacherous S-curves that required every bit of my concentration and downshifting skills. I saw the caution, steep grade sign flash by, and I knew this was where he would try to make his move. The SUV accelerated, pulling slightly ahead of my cab and then suddenly braking hard, trying to force me to slam on my own brakes and lose traction on the slick, mountain asphalt. If I locked my wheels, the trailer would swing around and crush everything in its path, including me. I had to make a choice. Do I play his game and hope I don't die? Or do I take the risk of using my size as a weapon to end this nightmare before we hit the bottom of the grade? I shifted down, feeling the engine roar in protest as the compression braking kicked in, slowing my massive weight without locking the tires. The SUV driver seemed frustrated by my refusal to panic, and he swung back behind me, his lights flashing rapidly in a rhythmic, taunting pattern. I looked ahead and saw the glowing orange signs of a runaway truck ramp, a long, uphill strip of deep gravel designed to stop vehicles that have lost their brakes. An idea began to form in my mind, a desperate gamble that required perfect timing and a complete lack of fear. I began to intentionally wobble my trailer, making it look like my brakes were failing and I was losing control of the heavy load. The driver of the SUV saw the instability and surged forward, pulling alongside me once more, likely thinking he was about to witness a spectacular wreck. As we approached the entrance to the runaway ramp, I waited until the very last second. Then I jerked my steering wheel hard to the right, feinting toward the gravel pit. The SUV driver, thinking I was crashing, veered sharply to the left to avoid being caught in the carnage. But instead of entering the ramp, I slammed on my brakes and swung back into the main lane, leaving the SUV with nowhere to go but the grassy median. The black vehicle hit the soft dirt at 80 miles an hour, spinning wildly as it lost grip, flipping twice before it came to a rest in a heap of mangled metal at the edge of the woods. I didn't stop to check on him. I knew that anyone who hunts people on the highway doesn't deserve my mercy, and I had no way of knowing if he had friends following close behind. I kept my foot on the gas, the engine screaming as I climbed the next ridge, until the lights of a 24-hour way station appeared like a sanctuary on the horizon. I pulled into the bright, LED-lit lot and practically fell out of my cab, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I told the state trooper on duty everything, and as they dispatched a cruiser to the wreck site, I sat on the bumper of my rig and watched the sun begin to bleed over the mountains. I was alive and the highway was quiet once again, but I knew I would never look at a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror the same way ever again. The rain was coming down in sheets that blurred the world into a gray smear of static and neon, and I was so exhausted that the yellow lines on the highway had started to look like slithering snakes. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into the gravel lot of the Pineside Motel, a sagging U-shaped building that looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the late 70s. The neon sign hummed with a sick, flickering buzz, casting a rhythmic red glow over the puddles that looked more like pools of blood in the darkness. I just needed 6 hours of sleep before finishing the drive to my new job, but the moment I stepped into the cramped lobby, a heavy sense of wrongness settled in my gut like a stone. The man behind the desk was wearing a tan uniform that was 2 sizes too big, and he didn't look up from a small, static-filled television as I approached. He pushed a heavy brass key across the counter without me even saying a word, his movements stiff and mechanical, and he whispered that I was in room 404 at the very end of the darkened wing. Why did he already have a key ready when I hadn't even given him my name, and why was the name tag on his chest completely blank? I took the key, my skin crawling as his eyes finally drifted up to mine. Eyes that were wide, unblinking, and filled with a frantic kind of energy that didn't match his sluggish body. I walked along the exterior breezeway, the sound of the storm drowning out everything but the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. Room 404 was tucked into a shadow where the outdoor floodlight had burned out, and the wood of the door felt damp and soft, as if it were rotting from the inside out. I stepped inside and fumbled for the light switch, revealing a space that smelled of lemon bleach and something metallic that made me want to gag. The room was eerily clean, stripped of any personality or comfort, with a single bolting lock on the door that looked brand new compared to the rusted hinges. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself that I was just paranoid from the long drive, when I heard a soft, rhythmic thud 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 coming from somewhere behind the heavy oak wardrobe. It wasn't the sound of pipes or the wind. It was the sound of something heavy moving behind the wall with a deliberate, slow intent. I stood up, my breath hitching in my throat, and realized that the wardrobe wasn't actually flush against the wall. There was a gap, a sliver of darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the bedside lamp, and as I leaned closer, I saw a faint glimmer of a camera lens peeking through a bored hole in the wood. Who was watching me in this godforsaken room, and how many people had stayed here before me without ever realizing they were being hunted? I moved toward the door, intending to leave right then and there, but as I reached for the handle, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots splashing through the puddles right outside my window. A shadow blocked the bottom of the door, a silhouette that stayed perfectly still, waiting for me to turn the lock. The staff member from the lobby wasn't at the desk anymore. He was standing on the other side of that thin wooden barrier, holding a master key that jiggled softly in the lock. I backed away, my mind racing through every possible exit, but the window was barred with heavy iron grates and the only door was being compromised by the second. In a moment of pure survival instinct, I grabbed the heavy iron floor lamp and shoved it through the handles of the wardrobe and the bathroom door, creating a temporary barricade just as the primary lock clicked open. The door pushed inward, straining against the security chain, and I saw the man's face in the gap. He wasn't wearing the tan uniform anymore, but a heavy rain slicker, and he held a roll of industrial duct tape in one hand and a jagged hunting knife in the other. He didn't scream or shout. He just began to lean his weight against the door, the wood groaning and splintering as he tried to force his way into my private sanctuary. I realized then that the wardrobe wasn't just a hiding spot for a camera. It was a disguise for a crawlspace door that led to the utility room. If he couldn't get through the front, he would surely try the back. I scrambled toward the wardrobe and shoved it with everything I had, feeling it slide across the floor just enough to reveal a small, square hatch in the drywall that was already beginning to swing open from the other side. I saw another pair of hands reaching through the hatch, pale and scarred, and I realized there were two of them working in tandem to trap me in this concrete box. How many rooms in this motel were connected by these hidden veins, and how many travelers had disappeared into the silence of the storm? I grabbed my car keys and my heavy flashlight, using the light as a bludgeon to strike at the hands coming through the wall, hearing a muffled curse of pain as the intruder recoiled. The front door was still held by the chain, but the wood was failing fast under the weight of the man in the rain slicker. I had one chance, and it was a violent one. I grabbed the small coffee maker from the counter and hurled it through the thin glass of the bathroom window, the only window without bars because it was too small for a human to fit through. The sound of shattering glass drew the man outside toward the side of the building, thinking I was trying to squeeze out. The moment his shadow moved away from the front door, I unlatched the chain and sprinted out into the rain, not even looking back as I dove into my car and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a roar just as the man rounded the corner, his face twisted in a mask of pure, silent rage. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud and gravel, and roared out of the parking lot without turning on my headlights until I was a mile down the road. I drove until I found a brightly lit gas station in the next town, where I sat in the parking lot and watched the sun come up through the pouring rain. I never went back for my luggage, and I never called the motel to complain. I just called the state police and gave them the address, knowing deep in my soul that when they arrived, they would find more than just hidden cameras behind those rotting walls. I was safe, But the memory of those unblinking eyes and the jiggle of that master key would stay with me every time I had to close my eyes in a room that wasn't my own.